what long-term capital truly deserves.
If you are just investing passively, then you'll never be able to beat the benchmark.
How can an investor say that an active fund manager is usually using his thought process?
So there's a concept which is known as active share.
Preserving wealth for 50 to 100 years?
Investors who are looking at daily returns and quartile performance. So that's very ironical.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time to dive into an episode for the day that talks about what long-term capital truly deserves. Welcome back, Ms. Yamini. We are here with Yamini Sood from DSP Asset Managers. So, Yamini, my first question to you: how can an investor say that an active fund manager is usually using his thought process or just hugging the index? What is your take on this?
It's a very good question, Kanishka, and very pertinent one. And let me give you a little bit of a history for this. So everybody loves to quote this PIVA report. You can find it online, where it talks about how 85% of active managers end up underperforming the index. So the incremental trend in the last few years has been that if somebody wants to invest in a large cap category, for example, they end up just investing in passive funds. Now that's a great idea. That's not a wrong place to start. That's amazing. But over a period of time, if you really want to generate alpha over your benchmarks, and your benchmarks are typically going to be, Nifty or a BSE 500 or something like that. And then if you are just investing passively, then you'll never be able to beat the benchmark. So that's the first place to start. And hence this question is important, what you asked. And how do you find that out? So there's a concept which is known as active share. Now, active share of the portfolio is that percentage of the portfolio where underlying weights are different from the benchmark that fund follows. If you pick up many funds, especially in the large cap category, this active share is generally in the range of 25 to 30%, which is considered very low. But that's the way you find out. And it is important because if a fund manager is truly applying a very independent thought process and has a strong framework for identifying stocks, it's a well-researched space, right? Especially large caps, a very well-researched space. Then it is important that he demonstrates that in his position sizing, and he demonstrates that through his portfolio holdings, both of which are visible through the active share of the portfolio. So yeah, that's an easy way to understand that. What I've also seen is that when it comes to small cap and mid cap investing, typically you will find most managers, they run a very high active share, and a lot of the funds in the industry have beaten the benchmarks hollow when it comes to small and mid cap investing. In large cap, that percentage is relatively lower. But the only way to find out is through active share, and also how aligned is your view or your thought process to the fund manager's investment framework. That is also very, very critical. So if I'm getting into an active strategy, it is equally important for the investor or for the family office to know what the fund manager stands for. Like in the beginning, I mentioned to you, a family needs to know what they stand for. You also need to know what the fund manager stands for. And is he even aligned to his framework? And that is something you get to know, you monitor over a full cycle. That cannot happen over a 6-month or a 1-year period. It will happen over a 3 to 5 year period or more.
So with that thought forward, according to you, how should families set benchmarks, and what are the current best practices evolving across leading family offices? What is your take on this?
Kanishka, that's a very, very important question. And when I talk to families, I get a myriad of responses. And sometimes it zaps me. मुझे समझ में नहीं आता है कहाँ देखूं. So if I have to elaborate, so I'll obviously, without giving any names, somebody was mentioning to me that, my money should double every 3 years. That's my benchmark. Then somebody else was like, my doubling cycle is 5 years. When you talk about a doubling cycle of 5 years, you're talking about a 15.5% CAGR roughly on your portfolio. How easy it is going forward, because jo ho gaya wo ho gaya. Like in the hindsight, you may have made whatever on your portfolio, But you are investing is to keep in mind what is going to happen in the future. You've got to anticipate, right? And then you got to calculate what are your return expectations. So to start with, um, yeah, and yes, so that's one way where people talk about doubling cycles, right? Some other approaches that I've seen, there are families which are very conservative. They will say that overinflation, this is the certain, they'll peg it over inflation, that over inflation, this is what my portfolio should return now. They can define the number. Somebody else might say that they'll have absolute numbers. I want say 16%, 18%, 20%, 21%. It's crazy numbers. So again, every family can be very different and benchmarking can be very different. Benchmarking is also a function of your overall asset allocation. For a family which believes in totally into equity as an asset class and has a 100% long only equity portfolio will have a very aggressive benchmark. On the contrary, if there's a very conservative family with 50-60% into fixed income, and in fixed income also you have variety, right? You have assortment of fixed income products as well. You could be very conservative and you could have a very high credit quality portfolio. You could also have a very aggressive credit portfolio. So, depending on them, your benchmarks again can be very, very different. So, if you ask me what is the best practice, very, very difficult to answer. But just to give you some hacks is, I can tell you like for an asset class, how you can look at benchmarking. So for equities, generally you could take a broader index like an NSE 500 or BSE 200 or whatever, and depending on then how are you going to allocate into equities, you could take that as a benchmark. And then for fixed income, your benchmarks could be sovereign. For private, most of the private investments in the books are at cost. So then, I know families who would even, who'll say that even the private investments should beat equity. Over a period of time, that is the endeavor. But if you benchmark it like that, there'll be a lot of room for error. There'll be a room for mistakes. There'll be a room for churn. And that can be very, very costly to the overall portfolio. So, hence, it depends on the asset class. And accordingly, you need to decide the benchmark. And it is something, again, even benchmarks need to be rebalanced. Again, this is a separate topic in itself, but it is very important to understand what is my overall asset allocation looking like. And for each asset, you need to define benchmarks and then arrive at a weighted portfolio average return expectation on the portfolio. That's how we look at it.
Interesting point, actually. It really resonates a lot. So, my last question to you would be for the day, if you had to give one piece of advice to families preserving wealth for 50 to 100 years, what mindset shift would have the maximum long-term impact? What do you think?
When it comes to families, they all say that we are managing decadal wealth and multi-generational, but they behave like investors who are looking at daily returns and quartile performance. So that's very ironical. And chasing fads, chasing trends, chasing what is going up, chasing the latest narrative, chasing the hottest stock idea. I don't mean to demean anyone, but I've just seen this too often. So if you truly ask me that what is that mind shift? So we talk about long-term orientation, but I'll say demonstrate long-term orientation. And truly long-term orientation, the way that when you develop that, you will realize that it can be very, very boring. So demonstrate that mindset and be okay with boring. If there's too much of activity, too much of thrill, if you love coming to office every day and wow, what am I going to do today? If you are still having that, then that there's too much of excitement, and that is something which can be very detrimental over a longer period of time. So hence, if you ask me, I will say have long-term orientation and be okay, be very happy with being boring. Now, that does not mean that you don't pay attention, you don't monitor your portfolio. Yes, obviously you need to do that. But if you can just end up taking 3-4 great quality decisions in a year, you've done a great job. Rest of the times, all you've got to do is sit, read, reflect. Obviously, there's a lot of information which is thrown your way. Can you filter it? Can you cut the noise? Can you go deeper into what you have or what you intend to have on your portfolio? So I think those are important things to keep in mind. And all of this will come when you really have a long-term orientation and you're okay with boring.
That's a great note to close this episode on.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanishka. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed doing this little podcast with you. And I really look forward to the Great Indian Family Office Summit and Awards in Delhi, subsequently in Mumbai.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yamini, for joining us for this wonderful episode of What Long-Term Capital Truly Deserves. If you want to dive deeper into these trending topics, don't forget to join us at the 6th and 7th edition of the Great Indian Family Office Summit and Awards 2026, where we discuss these trends live. Thank you very much. Stay tuned.